key to understanding what's going on in Gaza is the Israelis' principal goal here is to ethnically cleanse Gaza. It's to drive the Palestinians out. And to do that, what they want to do is make Gaza unlivable. And at the same time, find some countries or a country that will take in those 2.3 or 2.2 million Palestinians who now occupy Gaza. What they're interested in doing is driving the Palestinians from the northern part of Gaza, which is where Gaza City is, into an enclave in the south, concentrating them, and then eventually moving them out of Gaza. The problem that the Israelis face is that they can't find a country or countries that will take the Palestinians. So the Palestinians remain in Gaza. And the Israeli solution for dealing with this problem involves the continuous killing of Palestinians. This is why the genocide continues. The Israelis are not interested in some sort of meaningful peace settlement with or without Hamas. And it's not politically correct to say that in the mainstream media in the West. And we play all these games where we say that Israel's principal goal is to neutralize Hamas, get the hostages back. Yes, they want to do those two things, but the principal overriding goal is to ethnically cleanse. But they can't cleanse until they can figure out a way to get rid of the Palestinians. It's very important to understand that. So the Palestinians are there, and they are continuing, the Israelis, to try to make the place more and more unlivable, giving the West, giving the Palestinians, and giving some countries in the Arab and Islamic world an incentive to move, to transfer. But that involves the genocide. So the genocide will continue to go on.
And, you know, I've read some reports just earlier today that on the southern part here, just south of Rafah, where there's the gate here, that many in the Israeli government continue to put pressure on Egypt to open these gates and say that actually it's the Egyptians' fault as to why all these people are stacking up around here about what was Rafah. I don't know if you can even call it a town anymore, but some of these areas down here, because they're saying, hey, just open the gates, through the Philadelphia corridor, and then, there'll be people that can live without being fear of anything. What do you make of those claims? And will Egypt ever actually open that gate?
Well, I think what you're talking about dovetails perfectly with what I was saying. The Egyptians will not open those gates. The Egyptians will go to enormous lengths to make sure those gates remain closed, because the Egyptians don't want 2+ million Palestinians flowing into Egypt. They have made that unequivocally clear. The Israelis, of course, are relentless, and they are pushing and pushing and pushing. And the Egyptians are fully aware of that, and they're going to great lengths to resist the Israelis. And of course, the Israelis, in typical fashion, say it's not their fault, it's the Egyptians' fault. But it's not the Egyptians' fault. This genocide is a result of Israeli policy. And until they can drive all the Palestinians out, they will continue to inflict horrific punishment on the Palestinians.
So let me ask you a question that now moving to your international theorist hat on. You certainly are well aware of all the things that went into the apartheid government in South Africa and how it was dominant for many, many decades before finally external pressure began to change that dynamic there. And then they ended up seeing the changes. Do you see any potential replay of that in regards to global pressure on the government of Israel, or is this just a completely different animal?
Well, Israel benefits greatly from the fact that in almost every Western country, there is a powerful lobby that goes to great lengths to make sure that policymakers in those Western countries are not terribly critical of Israel and basically go along with what Israel is doing. And you certainly see this in the United States with both the Biden administration and the Trump administration. So I think a lot of Israelis think that they can get away with their barbaric behavior because the lobby has their back, which is another way of saying Western countries have their back. But the whole question of where this all leads is a different matter. The fact is that given the internet and given the fact that this genocide has taken place in ways that make it possible for a vast number of people around the world to see what is going on, and furthermore, given the fact that you have shows like this show and countless other shows of this sort that not only expose what the Israelis are doing, but are critical of the Israelis, Israel has ended up with its reputation being badly and permanently stained. This is, from a public relations point of view, a disaster for Israel. Furthermore, all of this kind of barbaric behavior inside Israel is going to have consequences on the body politic inside of Israel. I think a lot of secular, more moderate Israeli Jews are going to leave the country. I think the country is going to become more right-wing, if that's possible, with the passage of time. And I think that it will be a country that is in real trouble. Its sense of itself will be badly undermined. And people all around the world will look on Israel in, I think, very negative ways, in ways that has not been the case in the past. And if you look at public opinion polls, by the way, in the United States, it's quite clear that young Americans, including young Jews, have very critical views of Israel, much more so than older Americans and older Jews. And of course, those older Americans and older Jews are eventually going to die, and you're going to have more and more younger people who are going to be critical of Israel. So you have to ask yourself, moving forward 20, 30 years, what does Israel look like? Given the fact that it has been unable to solve this problem, the problem is likely to linger. I'm talking about the Palestinian problem, and that they're likely to continue to act in barbaric ways. I mean, what does this mean? And then when you get inside Israel itself and you look at the demographics, 13% of the population is now ultra-Orthodox. By the year 2035, given birth rates, about 30% of Israel's population will be ultra-Orthodox. Many of those ultra-Orthodox Jews are remarkably hardline, and they're not the sort of people who have close ties with the West, who generate a lot of sympathy in the West. So I think with the passage of time that Israel's image in the West will be badly damaged, and it will make it increasingly difficult for countries in the West or for governments in the West to support Israel the way they have in the past. And again, I think if you look at what happens inside Israel, just put the West aside, you look at what happens inside Israel, it's not a pretty picture. It's absolutely horrible what's happening now. And again, I think the situation is just going to continue because the Israelis have been unable to solve their so-called Palestinian problem.
And in fact, let me ask you, in the time we have left, real quickly, a couple of different scenarios. So let's look at one which would seem to be very unlikely on the surface, but work with me here. Let's say that somehow there's some passage, whether it's Ethiopia, somewhere in Africa, who knows where, but somebody says, yeah, we're willing to take a lot of the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip, and they end up going in some large number, or even weirder, Egypt opens the gates and they are successful at getting the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip, which so many in Israel actually want. What happens to the approximate 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank? Because with that kind of success, it seems pretty likely to me that the Israeli government will then do the screws now to try to get the Palestinians out of there. How do you see that unfolding?
Well, they'll go to great lengths to push the Palestinians out of the West Bank. I mean, the idea here is to create a greater Israel that's basically filled with Israeli Jews.
But how would they get past? So right now they're still trolling on October 7th. That's what drives everything. Hamas, whatever. They wouldn't have an October 7th or a Hamas to accuse in that case. How would they justify that in front of the world?
Well, the thing is that you didn't have an October 7th on October 6th. And the Israelis had worked out a modus operandi for dealing with the fact that the Palestinians were not going anywhere. The Palestinians in Gaza were not going anywhere. But then this event happened on October 7th. They saw an opportunity to cleanse. And I think that with regard to the West Bank, the basic view is that eventually there'll be an opportunity. There'll be some sort of conflict that will allow them to go to great lengths to push the Palestinians out of the West Bank. But Danny, you also want to remember, in the meantime, the Israelis are doing horrible things on the West Bank
right
as
now.
we speak. Yeah, exactly. It's not like they are accepting the status quo. They're going to great lengths to make life miserable for the Palestinians, to do everything they can to make the West Bank unlivable for Palestinians. Now, it's a fundamentally different situation than what you see in Gaza, because what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, and you don't see a genocide taking place on the West Bank. But nevertheless, the Israelis are in the process of doing the preliminary work for ethnically cleansing the West Bank, and that is their goal. Their goal, you want to understand, is to end up conquering territory and integrating into Israel in southern Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, I believe, in Egypt. I believe they'd take back the Sinai if they could. They have a very ambitious strategy when it comes to Lebensraum. And furthermore, they want to drive the Palestinians out. They want a state that's basically filled with nothing but Israeli Jews.
Well, yeah, that's about as hideous and barbaric as can be imagined, and it's unfolding in front of everybody's eyes. And even when those things are happening, all it's necessary. So up to this point is for the Israelis to just make declarative statements like they did at the Nasser hospital the other day, where they just said, oh no, there was a Hamas guy with a camera. That's why we shot. We didn't actually kill a lot of innocent people. And then it just gets accepted. So I guess as long as that continues on, this barbaric activity will continue on. Last question I have for you here.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing very quickly. I don't believe they get away with their lies anymore. They do with Israel's supporters in the United States. There's no question about that. Mike Huckabee, for example, believes this. You know, the people who run the ADL or AIPAC, they believe this. These Israeli denials. But the problem that the Israelis face is that the vast majority of people don't believe this.
You mean a vast majority of people around the world, or even in the U.S.?
Even in the U.S., you know, a poll was recently released. This is really quite remarkable. That shows that 67% of Americans who are Democrats, they're in the Democratic Party, 67% believe Israel is committing genocide or something akin to genocide in Gaza. And another 8% believe it's not genocide, but it's effectively mass murder. 67 plus 8 is 75. That's 75% of Democrats. 3 out of every 4 Democrats believes that Israel is either committing genocide, that's 67%, or genocide plus mass murder, that's 75%. This is really remarkable, because this is in a country where the mass media, where the New York Times, especially the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, rarely ever use the word genocide to describe what Israel is doing in Gaza. Yet 75% of American Democrats believe that Israel is committing either genocide or mass murder.
And what did that poll say about the Republicans?
Oh, it's almost exactly the opposite. It's really quite amazing, the difference between Republicans and Democrats on this issue.
And one wonders where those Democrats were when Joe Biden was in office doing the same thing that Trump is doing, but that's a separate issue. But that leads me into the last question that I had, though, is that remains possible as long as the government in the United States continues to do what it's done diplomatically and militarily and financially to help the Israelis. But what would happen if some unforeseeable time in the possibly near future, we have an economic crisis on our own side here and maybe a severe recession or so where we're not able to provide all of that kind of support to the Israeli side? If they ever lose the blanket support they have from the whatever administration it's in the Oval Office at any time, what would that effect have on the ground in Israel?
2 points, Danny. First of all, it's very important to understand, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, that Israel is extremely dependent on the United States. Israel could not behave the way it does without robust support from the United States, right? When people talk about Israel does this or Israel does that, they should really be saying Israel and the United States, because we are joined at the hip, and they could never execute this super ambitious and super murderous foreign policy without the full support of the United States. So just very important to understand this. Second point I would make to you is, even if you had a depression or a severe recession, I believe we would still continue to support Israel. And the reason is the power of the Israel lobby. You just cannot underestimate how powerful it is. It's, again, politically incorrect to say this in the United States. To talk about the power of the lobby is sure to get you into trouble, as I can attest to. But the fact is, the lobby is incredibly powerful.
So if let's just say that the as is probably pretty likely that the Democrats retake control of the House in 2026, what do you think is going to happen to that 75% Democratic opinions then?
Well, I think it's extremely unlikely that the Democratic leadership would crack down in a meaningful way on Israel. One could argue that, in 10, 15, 20 years, the situation will change. I don't know. But that situation is not going to change anytime soon. In fact, what's happening here is that this issue is causing the Democratic Party huge problems. I mean, you have this complete disconnect between the leadership and the rank and file. The rank and file, 75% of the rank and file believe that Israel is committing either genocide or mass murder. And by the way, if you look at that poll, this includes Republicans and Democrats. 1/3 of the American people think that what Israel is doing is not serving America's interests. Just think about that. 1/3 of the American people believe that what Israel is doing is not serving the U.S. national interest. This, of course, raises the question, then why are we doing this? And the answer is very simple. It's because of the power of the lobby.
Yeah.
American policymakers live in fear that if they do anything that's seen as anti-Israel, they'll be smeared in public and they'll be defeated at the polls.
And look, too many times that's exactly how it's worked out. That's not an unjust or unrealized fear. It has happened before. But anyway, listen, we'll certainly leave it there. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Really appreciate you coming on. And one of our hallmarks is we're unintimidated and uncompromised to tell the truth. And you have not backed down from that today, saying things that are in politics someplace, but accurate. And we really value that. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome, Danny. I look forward to seeing you the next time.
All right. And there's if you don't get enough of John coming on our show there, he's got his Substack at substack.com/@Mearsheimer. So you can get more of John in between now and then. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.